Father Augustine, Father Prashant, and having mentioned two fathers, one mother, my mother, Mrs. Lily Tharoor, my dear friend who insisted I come here, insisted repeatedly till I could no longer say no, Professor K.V. Thomas, my senior colleague in Parliament, our good friend Hybe Eden, MLA, present and former faculty, students, alumni, our friends from the media. I hope we have friends in the media, I'm not sure about that. And friends generally, I hope that covers everybody. എല്ലാവർക്കും എൻ്റെ വിനീതമായ നമസ്കാരം. I'm truly honored to be delivering the fourth Chavara Excellence for Social Transformation lecture that I'm privileged to deliver at the invitation of this wonderful institution, Sacred Heart College, a pioneer in the field of knowledge and education. This institution, of course, is one of many amongst the Carmelites of Mary Immaculate Society, and since 2004 you've been recognized as a college with potential for excellence, a tag which you have lived up to consistently. Education, I've stressed time and time again, is key to the bright and prosperous future, not just for all of you as students of the college, but for the upliftment and development of the nation as a whole. Education is the most powerful tool for social transformation and empowerment, and so it's absolutely indispensable we use its potential to bring about the kind of transformation we would all like to see in our society. And if I don't cover all the aspects, thank you, that you would like me to, we will have an interaction together after my lecture where you can question me on things that I may have failed to say. We've already heard a wonderful summary of the life of Saint Kuriakose Chavara, the founder of the Carmelites of Mary Immaculate, because he, and Father Augustine's summary makes it very clear, he understood this power of education in social transformation. He was a renowned social reformer, as you rightly said, Father, ahead of his time. He was a forerunner in many ways of Sri Narayana Guru, Chetambi Swamigal, Mahatma Ayyankali. All of these people followed in the path that he had also blazed earlier. He initiated many things that we take for granted today, whether it was opening schools across Kerala that granted everyone, irrespective of caste, creed or religion, access to education, or setting up shelter homes for the destitute. Saint Chavara really led by example. One must also remember his contribution to the empowerment of Dalits and also of women. He was a champion not just of education, but of education for all and equal opportunity for all. On this day, we remember him for his immense contribution to society, for believing in the power of education, and most important, I think, for leading by example in the process of empowerment, of equality, and of social transformation. I can proudly say that Sacred Heart College and other CMI institutions across Kerala that I have visited and spoken at remain committed to the vision that Saint Chavara laid down, and I must say that I applaud their commitment to ensuring excellence in education. The quest for excellence is, after all, not just about individual success, but also for the wider social transformation. Father Augustine, if I may be impudent enough to say, there's only one thing you left out in your wonderful summary, which I thoroughly enjoyed and respected. But that is that you didn't mention that Saint Chavara had a weakness that I also have. He was also an Aam Aadmi. He loved mangoes. And as a lover of mangoes, he had a mango tree in Mandalam, which not only did he enjoy the fruits of, but he spread wide and widely. He would get saplings from the tree and send them to various churches, saying, you plant these trees and you will enjoy the sweet fruit. And he was so identified with the mango that the mango became called the prior mango, because he was the prior general of the church. So, to my mind, as a mango addict myself, I have a special soft corner, not just in my heart, but also in my palate for Saint Chavara. In any case, we are not here to discuss mangoes. We are here to discuss as Father Augustine told us, the lesson that Saint Chavara taught of education as the key to social transformation. And when we talk about education in 21st century India, it's difficult not to acknowledge right at the start the fact that we confront a self-imposed handicap, of which I think we've just begun to grow conscious, that we are suffering an acute shortage of quality institutions of higher education. For far too long, we've been complacent about the fact that we have produced, since the 1960s, the world's second largest pool of trained scientists and engineers. They were more than our then protected economy could absorb, and their talents outran the facilities and the opportunities available to them in India. So many tens and thousands of them left to make their fortunes elsewhere, particularly in the West, particularly in the US, founding companies in Silicon Valley, inventing the Pentium chip, and even winning America a couple of Nobel Prizes. Their success meant that IITs soon began to be spoken of in the same breath as MIT, and the Indianness of engineers or software gurus is now taken as synonymous with technical and educational excellence. But their success, paradoxically, has masked the larger reality, which is that there just aren't as many of them as there should be. Talk to senior Indian executives whose businesses require them to recruit competent staff with scientific or engineering training, and they'll confirm that their demand for such talent vastly exceeds the supply. Once the elite institutions are accounted for, the IITs, the IIMs, the Indian Institute of Science, what remains is of decidedly uneven quality. For every Narayana Murthy produced by a local or regional engineering college, there are hundreds of graduates whom Indian employers, let alone international ones, do not consider ready for prime time. In fact, one of the underreported stories of today's unemployment situation is that if you look at the employment market in which companies like Tata's or Infosys are working, they're actually hiring people whom they do not consider to be up to par, and then spending 6 to 9 to 12 months educating them, making up through training for the kind of education they should have had in their universities. This is not merely professional training. These are companies that have set up entire campuses. If you go to the Infosys campus in Mysore, as I have, it looks like an American university campus in every regard. But these campuses essentially are there to make up for the deficiencies of the ostensibly qualified graduates they have. So the real campuses of India have failed to produce adequately qualified talent, and that's why the companies are adding a year's education sometimes in their own campuses. Now, this is why I believe that we have to worry about whether our educational institutions are producing the talent we need, not just for companies like Tata's and Infosys, but for the growth of our nation itself. Now, the irony is, of course, that India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world and ranks second in terms of student enrollment, exhibiting a healthy growth in the number of institutions and enrollment since independence. Despite serious handicaps of means and resources, the country, starting from the days of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, has systematically built up a very large educational structure and created a pool of men and women equipped with these scientific and technological capabilities we all desire to have. And I must say, if we just look at the numbers, I know numbers are difficult to absorb when you're just hearing them, but in 1947, we had a literacy rate of barely 17%, barely 30 universities, and about 700 colleges in the whole of India with an enrollment of just 4 lakh students. Today we have over 74% literacy, over 28 million, 2.8 crore students studying in more than 750 universities and nearly 42,000 colleges. And these numbers are far getting out of date day by day. Now, this is partly because in the first few decades after independence, the 2 E's of the Indian education system were understandably expansion, which I partly have just summarized, and equity, ensuring the inclusion of the excluded and marginalized groups, those left out for reasons of caste, of religion, region, gender. In the process, I will argue that we may have neglected the 3rd E, excellence, and I'll come back to that in due course, and we may not have focused enough on the 4th E in my catechism, and that is employability. So just to go through those 4 E's very quickly, the first E, expansion, is at the heart of our efforts to ensure that our massive demographic advantage with one of the world's largest young populations, you're all representatives of that, does not become a demographic disaster. With the adoption especially of the Right to Education Act by the previous UPA government, access to education for all is a vital imperative behind which the government has put its full weight. And since adopting RTE, we have achieved a gross enrollment ratio in primary education of 104%. A gross enrollment ratio is how many children are enrolled in educational institutions appropriate to that age group. So if you take children from the age group of primary school, our current rate is 104%. In other words, we are enrolling more children than are supposed to be in that age group because we are actually capturing children who missed out of school when they should have gone. And that is obviously a positive thing. But then there is a challenge in sustaining these rates of enrollment into higher education, like bringing students into a college like this one. By class 8, this gross enrollment ratio, GER, drops to 69%. If you look at class 11 and 12, the plus 2 years, it's down to 39%. So we clearly are not retaining all those primary school children through to high school. And when we come to college, we stand nowhere near the global GER. We currently have only about 25.2%, whereas the global GR is about 34%. What we call a good education, in relative terms, is still available to only a privileged few. And while on the one hand, private participation in education has succeeded in leveraging our resources and our endowments, on the other hand, it's also brought in concerns of commercialization, unfair practices, and a scramble for purchasing merit. Capitation fees, under-the-table payments, you know the whole story. In other words, much remains to be done as far as fairness in higher education is concerned. The painful history of millenniums of stratified and fractured social structure along caste and religious lines has left wounds across the body and soul of our system of education also, which have yet to heal. Coupled with this stratification is a glaring economic divide between the haves and the have-nots. Now, of course, we've tried to find answers to this baffling adversity in the shape of policies of positive discrimination, affirmative action, reservations, differential treatment, and subsidy regimes. But we have a long way to go, and there are still very many battles ahead of us. And that links to my second theme of equity. There can be little disagreement that a broad-based, easy-access education system that still systematically neglects the needs of some parts of our population obviously needs urgent reform. Now, we've made some progress, even considerable progress, towards overcoming these disadvantages. But there's a lot of unrealized potential, which we have been trying to bring, but have not fully succeeded, and that could potentially hold an answer to our demographic challenges and that is the sustainable, scalable opportunity to educate girls. My two-word mantra for how to make a better India is that, simply that, educate girls. Now, I'm glad to see that Sacred Heart College, which not long ago was an all-male institution, seems to have a majority of girls in the audience today. That's a very healthy sign. Now, when the UPA was running, the government focused very strongly on women's education, and I certainly hope that current and future governments will do more to ensure that that is actually pursued. And I'll touch on that later once more, but let me quickly go through those 4 E's. I mentioned that we faltered on the third E of excellence, and to this I have to add my 4th E of employability. The quality and employability of the vast majority of our graduates, as I mentioned earlier, is being seriously questioned. Employers associations like FICCI, CII, ASSOCHAM have conducted studies that have established widespread and high levels of dissatisfaction with the quality of graduates available for employment. One of them did a study, I remember, when I was minister, and 62% of the members of that organization, the employers, said they were dissatisfied with the quality of graduates available for recruitment. I've spoken to CEOs who feel that once you get past the top institutions, they simply cannot hire new people without additional training, which means that companies are now getting into the education business. And that too poses other challenges, such as they're paying higher salaries to teachers than educational institutions can, because they're companies. And so some of the best teachers and professors are now going to companies and their campuses rather than the campuses of our universities. Now, I have to say there's some real paradoxes here. At one level, we boast with pride about 500,000 engineers whom we produce annually. 500,000, 5 lakh engineers India produces annually. But there is an odd oversupply of persons with higher education. So overqualified people are being hired for jobs that they are willing to do, even though these jobs don't require their degrees. I'll give you one example. The State Secretariat in Uttar Pradesh this year advertised 368 posts for a peon. You know what a peon is? A chap who will carry a file from one bureaucrat's desk to another, who will bring tea. That is a peon. 368 vacancies of peons were advertised in Uttar Pradesh. You know how many people applied? 23 lakh candidates applied, including 2.2 lakh engineers and 255 PhD holders. So they had done a PhD, they could aspire to no better job than carrying a file from one junior bureaucrat's desk to another. That is the crisis we have. There were also thousands of candidates with master's degrees also in the same application list. So it looks like we are releasing improperly qualified graduates into an ecosystem that doesn't know how to use them. Some 80% of our engineers find themselves in jobs that do not require an engineering degree. I keep telling parents, I'm not even counting those engineers who get no jobs at all, and Mr. Modi is advising them to sell pakoras. So I keep telling parents in Kerala, why do you force your children to study engineering? Because of this old-fashioned idea that that is a highly desirable degree. Just yesterday, a young man came to see me who was denied a visa to study his dream subject of politics and international relations. He got admission to the London School of Economics, but the British turned him down for a visa because he had a bachelor's degree in engineering. And they said, why would an engineer want to study international politics? So I asked him the same question. And he said, because my dream was always politics, but my parents forced me to study engineering. And I had the marks, therefore I did what my parents told me to do. And I regret it very much today. And this is, I'm so fortunate, even though I belong to a much older generation than all of you, that I had enlightened parents who never forced me to study what I didn't want to. I still remember when we had to stream in class 9. We had to stream after our school, so I chose humanities, and my teachers were so upset. They called my parents to the school, and they said, this is our best science student. He has come first in science his entire years in the school. How can you let him go to humanities? And my parents, like good Malayali parents, had wanted me to be a doctor or an engineer. So they looked at me with shock and said, what's the matter with you? Why won't you take science? And I said, because I can't stand the subject. And they said, but you come first every exam. So I said, that's because I know how to take exams. But 2 days after I've taken the exam, I forget everything I've studied in science. Whereas you ask me about history or literature, I can tell you even today. And I'm grateful to my parents that they respected my wish and let me enroll for humanities. And I have led the life I have led as a humanities graduate. I continued doing well at exams, and I'm sure that helped, but at least studying what I wanted to study, what I enjoyed studying. So that, to my mind, this is one great lesson that I keep trying to drill into every parent I can come across. Let your children study what they want to study. They're the ones who have to wake up in the morning and look forward to going to work. Don't ask them to fulfill your dreams. You wanted to be an engineer, or you are an engineer and you want your child to follow, but they don't want to be an engineer, don't force them. Sorry for that digression from the theme of the lecture, but since our theme is social transformation, one of the aspects of social transformation we need is allowing our society to bloom in all the directions that our children would like to take it, rather than pigeonholing them into areas where our parents want them to go. Because there is a systematic problem in our society today of a skill mismatch between qualifications and jobs. A policy that encourages non-graduate technical and non-technical diploma or certificate holders into lower intensity occupations would actually help to close this gap, instead of forcing everyone to go and get a degree and after that they're applying for the job of a peon. The skill mismatch situation is a real problem. On top of that, research has actually looked into this, and they found that we have a shortage in some crucial areas. So for example, we have plenty of engineers, as I said, but we don't have enough engineers in telecommunications and information technology, which are growth areas, and industry wants more people who are telecoms engineers and IT experts. But that we don't have enough. I'm sure the day will come when we produce too many of those too, and then there'll be more and more parents saying, you must study telecoms engineering, and by that time the market will have moved on, and they should be doing robotics or artificial intelligence instead. But the point is, you should study what is relevant to your interests and what is needed in the job market. That's why we have so many unemployed engineers, because we're doing the wrong thing in this regard. To my mind, there's no shame in saying that we can and should be cognizant of market demands. We have to encourage more interaction between industry and academia. Mr. Narayan Murthy did a report for the UPA government on industry-academia interface, which, sad to say, the present government seems to have completely buried. And I think it's important to resurrect it. One of the controversial rules that the UPA passed was we will not give permission to open a polytechnic to anybody who wants to open a polytechnic unless there is an industry within 30 kilometers of that polytechnic. We said there is no point in having a polytechnic if the students and the faculty cannot actually connect to a real world industry and see what kind of work, what kind of skills are actually required. So these are amongst the challenges. Now, having stressed on employability, I'm not knocking the importance of pure knowledge and pure research. On the contrary, I believe that's also indispensable. In fact, in many ways, the way forward for us is to make India a knowledge society. We know our Prime Minister is going around saying, "Make in India," at a time when many, many companies of international renown will be making whatever they're making not in India, because they won't be making it with human beings anywhere. They'll be using robots. They'll be using new AI and robotic technology to manufacture many goods. So where can we score? We can score if we move towards being a knowledge society and creating expertise and excellence in these growth industries of the 21st century. We must have a society where the pursuit of learning and innovation should not be constrained by any lack of access, infrastructure, or support, where education is relevant to our society and provides the skills and competencies that our society demands. The fact is that we must understand clearly that a knowledge society is one that's committed to the excellence in the pursuit of knowledge in itself, and that means a culture of research and innovation is also important. That will help us also ensure the kind of technological leadership which will help our society become a strong, robust, and self-sufficient economy and society. A look around the world today will convince you that investments in long-term research have a very direct impact on the continued success of many nations. And the fact is that long-term economic growth depends intimately on innovation and invention. It's a strong correlation between innovation and productivity. So we have to actually participate more in research and innovation for growth. Now, but we have problems. We have a weak PhD research ecosystem. We are not considered to be in the top tier globally. In fact, we have emerged as the IT hub of the world, but that was very simple global back office stuff. But we have not been given enough credit for being inventors. This is so ironic because we seem to be heading that way. I remember in 2011, I was invited by the University of Toronto in Canada to inaugurate their India Innovation Lab. And the buzzword those days was Indovation, for Indian innovation. But that buzz has died down because we have not been able to deliver on that promise. We started off with Jugaad, but we didn't get beyond Jugaad. In fact, our share of global research output is far too low, 3.5%. Given that we have 17% of the world's brains, since we have 17% of the world's population, it's disgraceful we only have 3.5% of the world's research output. We know that no Indian college or university ranks amongst the top 200 in the prestigious Times Higher Education Supplement list, which is based on peer evaluations. There's only a handful of institutions in the top 500, whereas China, which is such a new entrant into international quality education, has 23 institutions in the top 500. Give you an example. The number of PhDs produced in computer science engineering in India was just 125. This is the last figure I could find. It may be slightly more now, but even though that represents a quadrupling in the last decade, it is very low compared to other leading economies. The US produced 55,000 PhDs in 2015 alone. Nearly 25% of the PhDs in computer science graduating in the US are of Indian origin. So there are Indians getting PhDs in computer science in America, but the same brains in India are not getting that. It seems to me the problem is we have not provided an environment where the best young minds can find a receptive audience to fulfill their creative energies. And then only can you lay a platform for real and sustained innovation. We must create that environment. Second on my list is a lack of adequate faculty. The handful who devote their lives to research represent the privileged elite of the apex of the higher education system. But as we go down the pyramid, the scenario is very different. The rapid expansion of the Indian higher education system has led to a severe shortage of faculty, as also major challenges of quality. The student-to-teacher ratio in the average Indian institution of higher education is 26:1. You know what the global norm is? 15:1. 15 students to one faculty member. We don't come close. Less than 200 universities and 5,000 colleges have been accredited by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. We are told in Parliament that even institutions like the IITs have a shortage of 30 to 35% of faculty. And of course, state universities suffer much larger shortages. Third problem, lack of industry investment in a career path for innovation. Why can't the industry offer innovators an opportunity to develop careers. We know every graduating engineer can't become a researcher, but we can try and understand why some of our best talents from our best institutions are not getting careers in industry. There may be attempts in some areas, but the fact is we have not created enough jobs for innovators in our country. And if you don't invest sufficiently in research for innovation, you don't give people incentives to do that research and innovate so they can get jobs and opportunities, they won't do it. Indian industry should realize that its long-term survival and prosperity depend on its ability to innovate and become creators of technology, not just consumers of technology. We're a country of over 1.3 billion people of diverse skills. 2/3 of our population is under the age of 35. We must use this demographic dividend to our advantage. And we must take scale as an asset. Make sure that what we do gets a large number of people involved, and therefore we have to encourage all colleges and universities to offer paths to opportunities in innovation and research. What are some of the big changes we need to ensure? One is, of course, Indian academia has to be able to mentor more researchers, more innovators. We have to put some faculty into non-PhD granting institutions so they can do the same thing. We have to encourage more funding into education from different sources. We are still underfunded in terms of the percentage of our GDP we are spending on education, which is about 3.6%, whereas the target ought to be about 6%. We're nowhere near there. And it seems to me that we need to reverse the doctoral brain drain by adapting best practices from around the globe. And as I've said, it's not just academia, industry must also play their part by making investments. You know that we can imagine a situation where a big industry comes to a university and says, if your doctoral students or your master's students will do this kind of research or this kind of product, we will give you the money to do that research and innovation, and you in turn can share the profits with us. What an incentive that would be for a university to direct its students towards this kind of useful applied research. Now we need to define more and more milestone-based goals, and we need therefore to get beyond that small 1/4% of graduate engineers who are considered immediately employable to make everybody else equally useful in our society. And I have to say that if we create this vibrant educational ecosystem, then each student should get opportunities in the areas of their interest and their choice, and we can make India into a leader in the field of research and innovation. As I said earlier, we have 17% of the world's brains. As our population goes up and China's plateaus, we may get to 17.5, 18%. Those brains can be made productive, and that can make India a world leader of tomorrow in the field of education and knowledge. You know, when I left India for postgraduate studies in 1975, we had a population of perhaps 600 million, a little less than half of today's population, and we had just 5 IITs. When I came back in 2008, the population had almost doubled, but we had just 7 IITs. And one was really the relabeling of an existing regional engineering college. To keep up with demand and the needs of the marketplace, we should have had about 20 IITs by then of the same standard as the original 5. Where are they? Today we've created 13 IITs, but many of the newer ones do not have faculty commensurate with the institution's brand name. And though the demand for such institutions has grown, the supply is simply not adequate. It doesn't need to be that way. I will exhaust yourself and me by going on talking about the challenges of our higher education, which is over-regulated and under-governed. I think those who run this college will probably have not very pleasant stories to tell about the UGC, writing and making its own demands about the size of the classrooms and the number of faculty and imposing its syllabus. That kind of over-regulation is completely old-fashioned and unnecessary. We need to encourage academic institutions to do their own thing, but we need to ensure that the quality of learning outcomes is high. That's the only way you can get good results. Our regulatory institutions are instead stifling academic advancement rather than promoting it, and issuing one-size-fits-all directives to universities about the size of their buildings, the number of classrooms and teachers, what they're allowed to teach. That is simply not the right thing to do. Even foreign universities are now showing a lot of interest in creating institutions in India. But the entry of foreign and private players in the socially sensitive sector has raised various concerns with regard to the equality of access and the quality of outcomes. Now, our government, the previous government, had prepared certain legislation which would have created a more regulatory, a more flexible and creative regulatory framework for this segment of our economy, but it didn't pass, I'm afraid, the vested interests in the Parliament. One more word about our teachers. We have to support them better. Our students are ill-served, but our teachers are no less ill-served. We don't have enough professors, researchers, and scientific scholars in our university systems. We don't make it attractive enough for others to join their ranks. In fact, I mentioned that many qualified professors are leaving universities to join these companies and teach in these remedial training institutions. But we need to make teaching a well-regarded and well-remunerated profession so that the best students will want to go into teaching rather than into other kinds of jobs. In many ways, one would argue that our national education policy is completely out of step with the times, and there is a vital need to ensure that the government of the day produces a well-thought-out, well-consulted new national education policy that would take into account these various issues and ideas that I have raised. I'm sorry to say that we have seen only a very modest stab at such an effort by the present government, and they're coming to the end of their term. I doubt very much that they will actually have a new policy in place before the Lok Sabha elections next year. I think it's a shame that so many Indian parents are spending money, $3.7 billion, to send over 100,000 Indian students abroad to the US and another 100,000 to other countries. This is a real pity, because we ought to be the kind of country that once again, as in the old days when Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramshila used to attract students from foreign countries. They were the first leading universities in the world, and students came from as far as Japan and Korea in the east and Turkey and Persia in the west to study in India. Today it's the Indian students who are going out to study. I consider that an absolute disgrace. And one of the reasons is we have not established enough high-quality institutions that students would want to study in, and that's something else we need to remedy. Finally, I want to try and wrap this up so we can have some interaction together. The importance of education, the importance of developing skills, as I've tried to describe them, clearly fundamental to the growth and development of India. And that, as Saint Chavara recognized, education is the greatest tool for transforming our society. If you want a fair and just society, it's got to be one where there is free and open access to education, free of prejudice and discrimination, and that every individual alleviates their conditions of life by using education to transform themselves as well as their society. As I said earlier, educating girls is key to this, but it's not just that. We also need to ensure that we create that ecosystem that will get girls as well as boys the right opportunities. I'm very, very proud of the fact that particularly in Kerala, where I'm very often encouraged, very often invited to address convocation ceremonies, give away prizes and awards, that increasingly I find that a majority of the prize winners, the highest rank holders, the Dean's List members, the gold medal winners, a majority of them are women students. I think that's not only a recognition of the fact that particularly in the South, that our women are seizing the opportunities that have finally been made available to them, but also it's a warning bell for the young boys that they have to work even harder to catch up and make their way forward in our society. If we do all of this, it seems to me that we do have an opportunity to fulfill Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's vision of a tryst with destiny. If we sweep the cobwebs out of our education policy, rethink those policies of regulation that are manifestly failing the country, if we create capacity and promote excellence, then we will be able to transform society for the better. If we don't, the alternative is awful, and it stares us in the face, because in 125 of our 625 districts, we have seen Maoist violence as unemployed, undereducated, and unemployable young men, particularly from the tribal populations, are induced by wrong-headed ideologues to take up a life of violence with 1,000 rupees and a Kalashnikov, because our educational system has failed to give them a stake in our society, has failed to equip them with the skills that will give them a chance to make a decent living for themselves and their family. And therefore they have no stake in the Indian economy, no stake in the future of India, because they don't believe they'll be a part of it, and that's why they have turned to Maoism and to violence. I say to you today, education is not only this tool for social transformation, but it is now a national security issue for us. If we don't educate all sections of our society, the poorest, the marginalized, the Dalits, the tribals, everyone who's been left out, we don't seize the opportunities that I've described to you, our demographic dividend will turn out to be a demographic disaster. And that's why I hope that our government, if not today's, then certainly the one that will come to power next year, will take up the challenge of coming up with a bright new education policy that will transform our country into the kind of just society that Saint Kuriakose Chavara wished for and worked for all his life. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to deliver this lecture, and I look forward to your questions.